Welcome back to the deep dive. Today, we're plunging into a really critical shift in the war in Ukraine.
Mm.
It's something that's reshaping, well, everything: international support, Ukraine's own long-term defense strategy.
Yeah, it feels like a pivotal moment.
Totally. Our mission, really, is to unpack what's going on with Ukraine's urgent push for joint weapons production with its allies,
Right.
and how some recent U.S. decisions on arms shipments are kind of accelerating all this. What does it actually mean for Ukraine defending itself and, for global alliances going forward?
It's a huge question.
And just to, I guess, ground this in the immediate reality, the brutal reality, just last night, Russian forces hit Kharkiv. Shahid drones.
Oh, man, again.
Yeah, one person killed, four injured, hit a car shop, buildings, infrastructure. Nearly 3.5 years into this, it just shows the immense pressure they're constantly under.
It really does. That context is, well, it's vital.
And all our insights today, just so you know, they're coming from a key AP News report. It's titled, "Ukraine Looks to Jointly Produce Weapons with Allies as the U.S. Halts Some Shipments."
Yeah, it's a stark backdrop, those ongoing attacks. Really hammers home the need for defense right
Oh,
now.
absolutely.
And what's really striking, I think, from that AP piece is how suddenly the ground seems to have shifted under Ukraine's feet regarding aid.
Hmm.
This U.S. decision,
Mm.
it's not like a brand new policy of not supporting them. It's more a suspension of deliveries they'd already agreed on.
A suspension, right. Not a cutoff, but stopping things already in the pipeline.
Exactly.
Hmm.
And it seems driven by this growing worry in the U.S. about their own stockpiles running low.
Okay.
So this isn't just, a minor adjustment. It feels like it's forcing an acceleration of this strategic pivot we're talking about. Might even redefine what being an ally looks like in modern conflicts.
That's a really powerful way to put it. And these suspended deliveries, we should be clear, we're not talking small stuff here.
No, not at all.
Anonymous U.S. officials, former security officials too, they've confirmed some pretty formidable weapons are on hold. Patriot missiles, GMLRS, this precision rockets, Hellfire missiles, howitzer rounds.
Right. The heavy hitters.
So how immediate, how severe is the impact on the battlefield when you withhold those specific systems, especially with Ukraine constantly asking for more air defense?
Well, that's the core concern, isn't it? Taking Patriot missiles out of the equation, even temporarily, directly impacts their ability to protect cities,
Hmm.
like Kharkiv, like you just mentioned, from those very drone and missile attacks.
Mm-hmm.
And HIMARS, using those GMLRS rockets. That system's been absolutely critical for hitting Russian logistics, command centers, way behind the front lines.
Game changers, they called them.
They really were.
Yeah.
So taking those away, it's not just fewer weapons overall, it's removing some of their most effective tools for defense and for keeping up offensive pressure.
And Ukraine's reactions sounds like it reflects that urgency.
Oh, definitely. Their foreign ministry put out a really strong statement, basically warning that any delay or hesitation will only encourage the aggressor to continue war and terror, not seek peace. Pretty blunt.
Wow. And adding another layer here, it sounds like Ukraine itself was maybe a bit caught off guard.
Yeah, that's another interesting wrinkle. The report says their defense ministry hadn't even gotten official notification about this halt.
Really?
Yeah, they had to actually request a phone call with their U.S. counterparts
Yeah.
just to verify what was going on.
Okay, that's surprising.
And then later, the foreign ministry summoned the U.S. Charge d'Affaires, John Hinkle, made it clear how critically important maintaining these defense packages was, especially, again, air defense.
So what does that communication gap or maybe lack of warning signal about the U.S.-Ukraine relationship right now?
Well, it could suggest maybe a level of frustration from Kyiv's side, perhaps a feeling of unpredictability or maybe not enough transparency.
I see.
It highlights that, while Ukraine obviously depends heavily on this aid, they're also dealing with the uncertainty of it.
Right.
And if you zoom out a bit, this isn't happening in a vacuum. Under the current administration in the U.S., there haven't been new announcements of military aid recently. And data from Germany's Kiel Institute, they track this stuff, meticulously shows no new U.S. aid commitments between March and April.
So it's part of a potential trend, not just a one-off suspension.
It seems that way. And the consequence is a much bigger responsibility is falling onto European countries.
Which brings us to Europe. It looks like they are really stepping up, at least in terms of the overall financial commitment.
Yeah, the numbers are significant. For the first time since, June 2022, European countries have actually committed more in total military aid than the U.S.
Wow. What are the figures?
About 72 billion euros from Europe, compared to 65 billion from the U.S., according to Kiel.
So is this just a temporary surge because of the U.S. pause, or are we seeing a more fundamental, maybe long-term rebalancing of who carries the weight in the alliance?
That's kind of the million-euro question, isn't it?
Ah,
Europe's increased contribution is definitely significant,
uh-huh.
but it probably reflects a growing realization over there that they can't just rely solely on the U.S. anymore, especially given the political wins in Washington.
Makes sense.
Denmark's defense minister, Troels Lund Poulsen, put it pretty clearly. He said, the U.S. decision just underlines the need for Europe to do more, invest more in Ukraine.
So it's a catalyst for Europe.
Seems like it. It's not just about aid packages anymore. It feels like it's pushing towards building a more robust, maybe more independent European defense capacity. And Ukraine is increasingly seen as like a key part of that.
And Denmark's approach, you mentioned them, that seems particularly innovative. It's not just sending weapons, right?
No, exactly. They're doing something different. They're investing directly in Ukraine's defense industry.
Hmm.
Denmark holds the EU presidency right now for 6 months. And they recognize that Ukraine can actually produce arms, produce ammunition, often faster and maybe even cheaper than importing it all.
Right, leveraging Ukraine's own capabilities.
Precisely. And here's the really novel part. They're actually allowing Ukrainian defense companies to set up operations in Denmark.
In Denmark, for safer manufacturing.
Yeah, say for manufacturing. They think the first companies might even start setting up by September.
Wow. What's the strategic thinking there beyond just, getting weapons made?
Well, it's potentially a game changer because it moves past that traditional donor-recipient model.
Hmm.
It's about building sustainable capacity. Instead of just shipping finished goods, Denmark is helping Ukraine actually develop its own industrial base,
Hmm.
even providing like safe zones for production.
So it's about long-term self-sufficiency, not just short-term supply.
Exactly. And fostering a deeper integration of Ukraine's defense industry with Europe's. We are seeing other European nations taking more direct approaches too.
Hmm.
Well, Macron, in France, had his first direct call with Putin in almost 3 years. Underlined France's unwavering support for Ukraine, called for a ceasefire.
Okay. Symbolic, maybe, but still direct contact.
And Germany's foreign minister, Johann Wadephul, visited Kyiv with German defense industry leaders. The specific goal was helping Ukraine make more weapons faster.
So it sounds like a real collective effort in Europe to shift gears. But even with all this European activity, analysts are saying there are still gaps they just can't fill.
Yeah, that's the difficult reality.
Right.
While European allies can definitely provide more things like artillery systems, which are absolutely crucial, don't get me wrong,
Sure.
they don't really have readily available alternatives for some key U.S. systems like those HIMARS missiles, the GMLRS,
Yeah.
and advanced air defense like the Patriots.
So those high-tech, maybe uniquely American systems.
Pretty much. So
Yeah.
how does that temper the optimism about Europe filling the void? It means Ukraine still faces some really pressing vulnerabilities, especially defending airspace and hitting those high-value targets deep behind Russian lines.
Right, which makes Ukraine's own strategy even more critical.
Exactly. It means that while Europe can ease some pressures, especially with things like artillery shells maybe, those high-end systems like Patriot, like HIMARS, they remain a really critical, almost unique U.S. contribution for now.
Okay.
Without them, Ukraine faces a definite vulnerability, which raises the big question. If allies can't completely fill that specific gap, what's Ukraine's long-term plan for real security?
And the answer, as the sources highlight, seems to be this strategic pivot towards self-sufficiency through joint production. It's a pretty bold vision.
It is. And necessary, it seems.
President Zelensky, he mentioned it in his daily address, said officials are preparing with urgency, meetings coming up with EU countries, other partners, all focused on cooperation in weapons manufacturing.
Yeah, it's clearly top of mind. This isn't just, some vague hope. It's becoming an urgent necessity.
And they're moving on it legislatively, too.
Apparently so. Ukraine's defense minister, Rustem Umerov, announced draft laws on this joint weapons production idea, expected to go to their parliament for a vote later this month.
That's fast.
It is. And these proposed laws, they've already shown them to their own national defense companies. So it signals a very clear, very actionable plan.
What's the goal of the legislation?
The ambition is to create a kind of special legal and tax framework, something to help Ukrainian defense manufacturers not just scale up what they're doing, but really modernize it,
Okay.
including building new facilities, potentially both inside Ukraine and maybe abroad, like we saw with the Denmark example.
Right. So it's a profound shift, moving away from just relying on aid to becoming a co-producer.
Exactly. A fundamental change in approach.
And it's not just talk either, right? The source mentions some examples of Ukraine's own innovations already.
Yeah, some good visual examples there. A demonstration of a Ukrainian-made drone, an unmanned ground vehicle that was at a Defense Innovations exhibition back in April. And even earlier, back in February, there was a handover of Ukrainian-made drone interceptors, these fixed-wing Basomar drones given to the armed forces.
So what do these concrete examples tell us about Ukraine's potential to actually be a partner in this, not just a recipient?
They tell us Ukraine already has significant ingenuity. They've got this wartime innovation pipeline going. They're not starting from scratch here.
Right. They've been forced to innovate.
Absolutely. These examples show they can develop and deploy effective, often pretty cost-efficient solutions for immediate battlefield problems. The challenge now is to, well, industrialize that innovation. Scale it up with help from international partners. It really transforms Ukraine, potentially, from just a consumer of security into a provider, or at least a co-provider. That could have really long-term implications for how European defense is structured.
Now, we should probably include the other perspective here. From the Kremlin, what's their take on the U.S. aid halt?
Right, important to cover that. Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov, he stated that the Pentagon's decision will actually help bring a settlement closer.
How so?
His reasoning was the fewer weapons supplied to Ukraine, the closer the end of the war is.
Okay, a very different interpretation of the situation.
Starkly different. It's a pretty classic Kremlin narrative, isn't it? Aimed at undermining Western support, suggesting that continuing aid just prolongs the fighting.
Right. From their view, less aid is good.
Less aid is a win, yeah. It confirms their belief, perhaps, that the West will eventually get tired. For Ukraine, obviously, it's the complete opposite. Less aid just emboldens Russia.
So the big picture here, Russia's pushing offensively, peace efforts seem stalled. It all just underscores Ukraine's urgent need for sustained defense capabilities.
Absolutely critical. Whether that capability comes from external aid or, increasingly, as we're discussing, from their own domestic production and these joint ventures, the need itself remains absolutely vital to resist aggression and eventually, hopefully, to seek a just peace.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, the key takeaway seems pretty clear. This U.S. aid halt, it's more than just a bump in the road.
Feels like it, yeah.
It's acting as a powerful catalyst. It's pushing Ukraine hard towards greater self-reliance, and it's forcing this deeper, more integrated collaboration with European partners. It's fundamentally transforming their defense strategy, moving maybe from dependency towards co-creation.
Co-creation, I like that. And that transformation, it really opens up a fascinating, maybe provocative thought for you, the listener, to consider.
Go on.
As nations all over the world face their own pressures, stockpile issues, shifting geopolitics, how might this push for more localized joint defense production reshape the entire global arms industry?
Interesting.
Could we be moving beyond those traditional aid models towards a new era where alliances are defined not just by shared values, but maybe by shared manufacturing lines?
Wow.
And what does that imply about the kind of long-term commitment needed to actually secure real peace rather than just, managing conflict indefinitely?